Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of the personality. Today, I'd like to discuss emotional closeness. What does it mean to be close to another person? What does it mean to open up to someone? I think you have probably noticed more than once that people who speak about themselves quite emotionally and sincerely, even about their troubles or grief, somehow still do not allow true intimacy. In other words, they overflow with emotions, but you do not feel any closeness with them. Intimacy is always frightening for our animalistic side. When we allow ourselves to be close to someone, at that moment, both our own instinct for self-preservation and the other person's instinct for self-preservation are triggered. Why is that? For us, it happens because when we allow ourselves to be open and intimate, we are showing vulnerability. In other words, our inner beast says, you are exposing yourself right now, you are revealing your vulnerable spots, the very places where you could be hurt. Speaking openly about something, even during a session with a psychologist or when sharing with a friend we've known for many years, creates a certain inner trembling, as if we are crossing an internal boundary. This is the prohibition imposed by our instinct for self-preservation, by our inner beast, against showing weakness. Similarly, when we display vulnerability, the other person will also experience mixed feelings. On the one hand, their instinct for self-preservation will undoubtedly record this somewhere in its internal library, because our instinct for self-preservation is designed to notice vulnerabilities, to spot weaknesses, so that it can later take advantage of them if necessary. In other words, the instinct for self-preservation needs another person's vulnerability for only one reason to strike, or to stop being afraid. So when someone else displays vulnerability, we feel less afraid because they are revealing their weak spots. If a person joins a group where people share their experiences, there is a real need for everyone to be vulnerable there, then everyone will reveal these weak spots. And it will be as if everyone has compromising information on each other. So our primal side forbids us from being vulnerable, forbids us from showing vulnerability. And that is why when we enter an unfamiliar group, an unfamiliar company, or step into public activity, we are always tense and guarded because we are preparing to fend off an attack. The environment is unknown to us. We are tense and controlling within it. And if on the inside it feels to us that we are vulnerable, that we are in an unfamiliar place and we are afraid, then from the outside, we will be perceived, on the contrary, as aggressive, tense, and ready to strike. It is important to remember this difference between our inner state and how we appear outwardly. So inside, I feel afraid. Inside, I am in a vulnerable position. But on the outside, I will be perceived as aggressively preparing to attack. When it comes to vulnerability, first and foremost, in order to be vulnerable, to allow yourself to experience closeness, it is essential to establish contact with yourself. So when we talk about the unbearable nature of intimacy, the impossibility of being close, we are actually considering two factors. The first is, what is a person's relationship with themselves like? And the second is, what are their relationships with other people like? So let's start with closeness with oneself. Let's do a small exercise together. Right now, shift your attention inward. Detach from this video for a moment and try to experience yourself as a person, as an entity, as a human being who possesses a vast array of different aspects and expressions, someone who can be equally kind or cruel, who can be both foolish and wise, who can be both weak and strong. Try to expand your sense of I am to encompass a certain perimeter. And this perimeter is like a polyhedron. There is no single specific definition such as intelligent, kind, or cruel. We are incredibly diverse. And in addition to this multifaceted nature that we are experiencing right now, try to simultaneously hold your past in your awareness. That is, behind you lies a certain number of years filled with events you have lived through. There were situations you managed to handle with dignity, and others where you did not. There was pain, there was joy, there were achievements, and there were mistakes. And beyond connecting with your past and its full richness, try reaching a little into the future. That is, each of us has a future, even if it is just a moment, a second from now. It could be years, it could be decades, we do not know, but we do have some kind of future. And by experiencing our full presence across space and time in all its depth and continuity, that is precisely when we feel a sense of closeness with ourselves. This happens when we can look at our past and present without censorship, that is, with acceptance. In this acceptance, there should be no judgment. It should be a calm, matter-of-fact contemplation of ourselves in the present and in the past. Okay, we've done a bit of quiet observing. And within this observing of ourselves, we may begin to sense something unexpected love. When there is no judgment, no evaluation, no negative context, and no comparison with some ideal version of ourselves, it is in that moment, in this closeness with ourselves, that we experience love. Closeness is the absence of fear. And first and foremost, it is the absence of fear of self-punishment. If we are now talking about closeness with ourselves, in other words, our choice not to punish ourselves for something will determine the level of our honesty, and therefore the level of our closeness. It is the vulnerability we can allow ourselves to feel with ourselves without attacking that weak, vulnerable, and open place within us. If you are unable to contemplate your past and your present self without these attacks, then being close with other people will also be difficult. Right now, you can fully sense how well trained your inner beast's instinct for self-preservation is always ready to attack your weak spot. So, closeness with oneself. There is already a huge number of videos on my channel about how to develop closeness with yourself. First and foremost, this involves working with autoaggression. Working with autoaggression means working with the ideal self. It's when we don't attack ourselves for certain problematic aspects, but instead strive to understand them. And once we understand, we gradually begin to work on them. The second point I mentioned concerns other people. At the beginning of this video, we already discussed how we tend to strike at vulnerable spots, to jot them down in some kind of notebook so that we can use this knowledge later. If someone suddenly attacks us, if someone makes a claim against us, we can bring out this compromising information. And in that moment, we won't feel weak, we won't feel powerless or unable to defend ourselves. In other words, if someone shoots an arrow at us, we also have arrows that we can shoot back at them. It is precisely because of this that a real dialogue becomes impossible when a problem arises. In relationships with friends, spouses, and relatives, it becomes almost impossible to even talk about how you feel because it is instantly perceived as a complaint, and some people do express it as a complaint which leads to conflict. In other words, instead of the closeness that could have developed where I share my feelings, where I talk about my perceptions at that moment, I am met with complaints directed at me because my story about myself is perceived as an accusation against the other person. And as a result, that closeness never forms. But for many people, it is precisely during arguments and conflicts that they can feel the greatest sense of closeness they are capable of experiencing. That is, they finally stop holding back and unload everything onto each other. And in that moment, they are not pretending. In that moment, they are not enduring or tolerating. In that moment, they are in a way, just as they are, but not always entirely as they truly are. And as we discussed when we did the exercise on complexity, we said that it's impossible to be kind all the time. This aspect of aggressiveness exists within us as well. And in these moments, I don't hold myself back. In this lack of restraint, I feel a sense of closeness with the other person because I have stopped pretending. In other words, we stop pretending. And this removal of restraints and vulnerability is what many people often mistake for true closeness. As we discussed, closeness is the experience of all aspects, but it is fundamentally about honesty. And when a person pours out their emotions, releases their aggression, it can feel as if they are becoming closer to the world because they are taking off the straitjacket they use to control themselves. In other words, I am the one building this wall between myself and the world because I'm afraid of the world's response or of being rejected or of not receiving what I desire. And when I throw off this straitjacket, I stop pretending. In that moment, I feel a sense of closeness. So when we talk about closeness, it's important not to look for a simple, straightforward definition, but rather to understand the many facets of this concept. So I might feel closeness when I let my emotions burst out, but this kind of outpouring carries the risk of emptiness around me, as people may scatter. Not everyone can handle it. Even if it's not aggression, even if you're constantly expressing grief or dissatisfaction, the other person has a limit to what they can bear. It's as if to feel close to another person, all we need to do is spill everything out of ourselves. But this won't be closeness with another person. It will be closeness with the outside world, a world where we've stopped pretending. Will closeness with the other actually arise? The other person might pull away in the very first minute of your emotional intensity. Everyone has a limit to how much emotion they can handle. Some people can tolerate more without shutting down or closing off, while others can handle less. That's why, to create truly genuine closeness with another person, we need to understand who we are communicating with right now, who we are saying this to. Will this person be able to handle it? Will they understand it? Many people look for some kind of universal formula, an equation. How can I stop being afraid of people? How can I become closer with everyone? Well, there simply aren't any such recipes, you see. That's a kind of duality, a sort of oversimplification. People are all different. With each person, you will need to build this connection anew to determine the degree of closeness that is possible with them. If a person is driven by a lot of primal instincts, it's important to understand that your closeness with them may have consequences for you. In other words, this person will interpret your closeness as a sign of your weakness. It will bring you closer and they will stop being afraid of you, as I mentioned earlier in the video, but this won't be genuine human closeness. This happens when we don't understand who is in front of us. Remember, we also talked at the very beginning that when I enter an unfamiliar group, I feel tense. The entire universe, the whole world, can become such an unfamiliar group. When you are too focused on yourself and show no interest in others, it becomes completely unclear how to live, who you can be close to and who you cannot. When you are not fixated on yourself and you have a desire to explore this world, to get to know others, then you don't feel fear because you have a general sense of who is in front of you. And you can wait for a while to fully understand and only then open up. When someone tries to get close right away, they often say something like, let's skip the formalities, let's be on a first name basis. And a sense of over-familiarity creeps into their communication. It's their way of dealing with fear, jumping straight into emotional closeness, which can feel like too much exposure in a space that isn't safe yet. I think all of you who have moved into close contact, it's as if we're already the best of friends. You can't attack me anymore because I'm your friend. We create the illusion of closeness, but this illusion is superficial because in reality, we haven't truly gotten to know each other yet. Sometimes this happens. This is my person, my kind of person. And you start to open up, and then you get yourself into something and think how wrong I was, how mistaken I was. In other words, building closeness with people takes time. But we want to know right away, is this person a friend or an enemy? What can I do? What can't I do? Because building closeness with new people involves mental effort and interest in the other person and learning about them. But this learning is not from a predatory perspective, but rather as one human being learning about another. So we have talked about closeness with oneself. If a person is not close to themselves, they are always pretending to be someone else. And all they can offer others is this dummy, this image they have created of themselves. And other people can sense this. Yes, the person themselves feels it too, because in their interactions, it's as if they never find that closeness. In formal communication, we interact through these dummies, these images. But each of us longs for this closeness, because in that closeness, we stop being afraid. And when our fear goes away, a great potential opens up within you as we become smarter, calmer, and we like ourselves in this fearless, open state. We long for this closeness, but in order to learn how to create it, we need to go through a certain process. Many people confuse fusion with closeness. As we've already mentioned, there are people who seem as if they want to consume you. Fusion is always about absorption, whereas closeness is always about being together. In other words, two people can create genuine closeness if they truly see each other. They need to be at a certain level of personal development. They should no longer be self-absorbed or selfish, so that they can take a sincere interest in one another. And then weaknesses become something I do not want to hurt in the other person. I understand that this is a sensitive spot, and I keep that in mind, carefully avoiding these areas in order to treat the other person gently. If the beast does not talk about some painful places because he is afraid of some reaction, he thinks about himself all the time. But true human closeness involves treating the other with care, with understanding, and with respect for their vulnerability. There is always respect in true closeness. When building closeness with yourself, there must also be respect. Respect, understanding of your own weaknesses, and acceptance. Revealing everything about yourself and creating a hasty, impulsive closeness can lead to a lot of shame later on. It's like undressing in front of a stranger. And then there will be an attack on yourself. So it's as if this fear pushes you into close contact, into an overly intense friendship. But afterwards you feel ashamed for having exposed yourself. These are my thoughts on intimacy. Of course, I couldn't fit everything into this video. It's a vast topic, and I invite you as fellow explorers to share your own additions. In other words, what else would you... No, that's not quite right. What else could you add to what I've already said? Your own thoughts. Certainly, I haven't said everything. This is a vast space for your creativity and your thinking. I'd like to invite you to subscribe and take a deeper look at the channel. There are many videos here exploring how our emotions influence our thoughts, reactions, and relationships. You can also share in the comments what themes you'd like to see in future episodes. How do you deal with intense emotions, your own or someone else's? So feel free to stay, take a look around, and connect. Goodbye, and see you again soon.